Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Today we're talking about a movie that surprisingly I don't have a poster for, Despicable Me 3. So Despicable Me 3 is again a movie that, much like Transformers, I don't think we needed another sequel to, or at least not to this extent. So the first Despicable Me obviously had its charm. The second one tried to cash in on that charm by doing a lot of the same stuff over. Then you have the Minions movies, which I said kind of didn't need to exist. They were kind of pointless, but people like the Minions for whatever reason. And then we have Despicable Me 3. Honestly, I felt about this movie about the same as what I did about the Minions film. We really didn't need this one. They could have told this story and kind of wrapped it around other things happening, but it is what it is, and it worked for what it was, but didn't really need to exist. So we start out being introduced to this character named Brat, who apparently was a television actor, a child actor, who had a show where he was an evil villain. Each week you would follow his adventures of him stealing something or doing something evil and kind of being the hero of the show by being a villain, which really didn't make sense. But then, after 3 seasons, he hit puberty, his show was canceled, and he never really recovered from being a child actor to the point where he took his character real seriously and became an actual villain. So Gru, now being a agent of good, or whatever organization he works for, but being a good guy now, keeps tracking down and thwarting Brat's plans, but he can never seem to capture Brat. So it's an ongoing problem where, he's going to steal this giant diamond. We stopped him. We got the diamond back, but he escaped. Well, there's a new director in the organization who sees this failure as enough is enough and fires Gru. And, of course, his now wife that he met in the second one gives up her job to show that she stands behind Gru and that he's a good agent. So now they're both out of a job. So, of course, the Minions think that since Gru is now no longer the good guy, he's going to go back to being a villain. And he says, no, I'm not going to go back to being a villain. And they're like, well, we want to do villain stuff, so we're leaving you and going to go find someone else. Which they do, and somehow, I forget what all happens, but it leads to them being in jail. And then the side plot of the Minions is them breaking out of jail finally when, after a while, they start to realize they miss Gru, and, Gru always took care of them regardless of whether he was a good guy or a bad guy. And they were wrong, so now they're going to go back to him. So they devise this plan to break out of prison and go back to Gru. So that's the whole side plot for the Minions, is them leaving home and then trying to escape prison to go back home. Which, again, pointless. Doesn't need to be there. It's filler. But then we find out that Gru is contacted by this guy who says, your twin brother would like to meet you because your father passed away and he doesn't have any family left and blah, blah, blah. And Gru's like, my father died a long time ago. I don't have a brother. And he shows him a picture of the two of them with Gru's mother when they were younger. So he goes and asks his mother about it. And she says, yes, it's true. Me and your father got divorced. And we each decided to take one kid, raise them how we saw fit, and never speak to each other again. No one would ever know about the other, blah, blah, blah. And she says that she should have chosen the other child because she's always seen Gru as a disappointment, even though over the last couple films he sort of reconciles with his mother, but then in the next one she disapproves of him again, which I never really understood that back and forth. So he goes, oh cool, I have a brother, I'm gonna go meet him. And then he's all excited about meeting his brother until he gets there and actually meets his brother and finds out his brother has hair. And then all of a sudden, because his brother has hair and he's bald, he instantly doesn't like his brother, he doesn't trust his brother, he doesn't want to be there, he wants to go back home. And it just really doesn't make sense other than showing Gru to be kind of petty. But then the kids and the wife go off into town with the butler, and he's showing them around town, and there's this whole side plot about the mother trying to establish herself as the mom character, and she's not used to having kids, she's stepping into this and she doesn't really know how to handle it. And she's doing okay with most of the kids except for the oldest one. And even then, the oldest one is trying to help her with the younger ones. And every time she gives her advice, she kind of turns around and uses it on the older ones. And then the older one's like, I'm giving you this advice to use on my sisters, not on me. And she's like, well, I'm your mother too kind of thing. So it's this whole back and forth about her trying to be a mom to them and not knowing how, even though they already look at her as a mother figure because she's there. So she's really panicking over nothing. But while they're off, Gru and his brother Drew get to know each other better, and Drew reveals to Gru that their father was a notorious villain, and that the father always looked at Drew as being a failure because Drew had hair and the whole villainy aspect of the family was being bald, because he was like the bald baron or something like that. I forget what they called him, but his whole point was he was bald. So Drew tells Gru that their father always kept track of what Gru was doing. He was happy that he became a villain. He was happy that he was bald. He was really proud of him. And that, he always looked at me as a disappointment. And then Gru kind of relates like, so you were a disappointment to Dad, where I wasn't, and I was a disappointment to Mom, where you probably wouldn't have been. So he kind of starts to relate to him again, and then Drew is like, can you teach me how to be a villain like Dad and like you? And he's like, I can't, I'm not a villain anymore. And he goes, well, you're not a good guy anymore either since you've been fired. So Gru comes up with the idea that he's going to teach him how to be a villain, but it's all a front because they're going to go after the brat guy and steal back something that he just stole. And once they steal it back and capture him, he can turn him over to the organization they got fired from and get his job back. So they go on this heist under the guise of they're doing villainy. And then as it plays out, Drew finds out that Gru was originally going to still be a good guy anyway. And at first he kind of hates him for it. And then after a while he's like, look, you're my brother and I understand. So they bring down Brat together and Drew moves in with Gru back at his house back in the city, even though Drew had a mansion that he could do whatever from. But he moves in with Gru, and the minions are back home now. The girls are back home. The mother's back home, and the mother and daughters have bonded. The little girl found a real-life unicorn. Supposedly it wasn't really a unicorn, but she didn't care. She loved it anyway, and she was told she could keep it if she found it. So there's a whole nother little side plot with that, with the other two sisters trying to find a unicorn. So they're all back home, all living together, and he goes, okay, well, I'm back to work tomorrow, so no more villainy. And Drew says, okay, no problem. Well, then Drew and the minions sneak off, and Gru comes outside to see what all the ruckus is because they're stealing his ship. And he goes, what are you doing? I thought we said no more villainy. And he goes, sorry, brother, somebody has to keep the family tradition alive. And he takes off. And then the wife's like, should we go after him? And he's like, no, honey, he's my brother. Let's give him a 5-minute head start. So then it's like this whole thing about now Drew is Gru's nemesis, I guess. He's the one he's going to hunt down, and there's kind of going to be this family play. And now the minions have their villainous leader that they can follow around again, where nothing was really being done on Gru's end since he became a good guy. So it kind of lets the minions get back into their line of work. It reestablishes one of the characters to follow the family lineage of being a villain, and still gives Gru his happy family environment. So everything kind of wraps up sort of back to the way it was, but everyone's a little bit better off in the end. And that's basically the entire movie is Gru meets his brother Drew. They get to know each other, like each other, go on a quest together, and everyone has a happy ending in the long run, but nothing really dramatically changes. So again, it's kind of an uneventful film, doesn't need to exist other than, hey, we're introducing this other character of Drew now. So Gru has a brother, but beyond that, this movie served no purpose. So what would I give it as far as a star rating? I'm going to say a 2.5 on this one. It's basically middle of the road, nothing really going on with it, but it wasn't bad either. It wasn't any worse than the other ones, and I was able to sit through this a lot more easily than I was the Minions movie, and it might just be because the Minions being the main focus of that movie doesn't really provide a whole lot since they barely speak, where in the Despicable Me films, people speak, there's dialogue, things are established, so it's a little bit easier to sit through. And I think that overall is why I would normally give this one a middle of the road, but like I said, it's uneventful and really doesn't need to exist, so that's why it gets bumped down to 2.5. So that's it for this episode. Again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are down in the description. Click the bell up there in the corner. Make sure you get notifications every time I post new content. Until next time, we'll see you after the credits.